Hurricane Irma, one of the most powerful in history. San Juan, P.R. Hurricane Irma struck the northeast Caribbean with terrifying force Wednesday, its battering rain and winds of up to 185 miles per hour leaving a trail of chaos, wreckage and flooding from Barbuda to Puerto Rico, before taking aim at islands farther west and, beyond them, Florida. Already one of the most powerful storms ever recorded, Irma could become one of the most destructive as well, depending on its path, and officials from Turks and Caicos to Florida pleaded with people to heed advisories to evacuate to shelters and higher ground. The National Hurricane Center described the hurricane as potentially catastrophic. The storm made direct hits on Barbuda, St. Barthélemy, St. Martin, Anguilla and the British Virgin Islands, and raked the United States Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico with hurricane-force wind and torrential rain. Gaston Browne, Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, said Irma had destroyed 95% of the structures on Barbuda, an island with about 1,600 people. The authorities confirmed that the hurricane had killed at least one person in Antigua and Barbuda, one on Anguilla, a British possession, and two in French territory, which includes St. Barthélemy and the northern part of St. Martin. Another died in Puerto Rico while preparing for the storm. Irma will bring life-threatening wind, storm surge and rainfall hazards to Puerto Rico on Wednesday into the northern coast of Hispaniola, which includes the Dominican Republic and Haiti, on Thursday. The Hurricane Center warned it will pass directly over, or very near, the low-lying islands of Turks and Caicos, a British possession, and parts of the Bahamas on Thursday and Friday, the center forecast, and push a storm surge of seawater 15 to 20 feet high. The surge could put large parts of the islands underwater. Hurricane Irma, now a Category 5 storm, threatens the Caribbean and Florida September 4, 2017. Hurricane Irma, packing 185 mph winds, makes landfall in Caribbean September 5, 2017, across the islands that were hit on Wednesday. People posted videos and photos online of the hurricane's fury, debris flying sideways and near zero visibility, roofs ripped off structures, waves surging into buildings, downed trees and utility poles, and streets that had turned into raging currents carrying away cars and trucks. The French Interior Minister, Gérard Collomb, said the four sturdiest buildings on St. Martin had been destroyed, which means that in all likelihood the more rustic buildings are probably totally or partially destroyed. With phone lines and electricity cut in many places, and roads impassable, President Emmanuel Macron of France and other officials said it was far too early to assess the true toll, in either lives or property. The aftermath of the storm will be harsh and cruel, Mr. Macron said after a crisis meeting at the Interior Ministry in Paris. We will have victims to lament, and the material damage on the two islands is considerable. The devastating winds left many scrambling for safety. Carmen Caballero, a 69-year-old retired doctor, was unsure at first whether to vacate her two-story home in San Juan, the capital of Puerto Rico. It is made of concrete, but has a metal roof that she feared might be ripped away. Then the power went out, the pelting rain and howling wind began, and she could hear debris crashing into things around her house and see tree branches falling into the streets. She packed some water bottles, nuts, medicines, linens and other supplies in her car and drove to the shelter at the Roberto Clemente Coliseum. All my neighbors left too, she said over the phone from there. I wasn't going to stay alone in my house. On Culebra, a small, rustic Puerto Rican island east of the main island, José Perez, the municipality's director of emergency management, took shelter with about 65 other people at a public high school Wednesday afternoon. Like many people there, he said, he lives in a wooden home. Right now we are feeling the fury of this hurricane, Mr. Perez said in Spanish by phone. I was 13 and I obviously remember Hurricane Hugo, but this is something incomparable. This is something terrible, an experience out of this world. Kelsey Nowakowski and some friends boarded up her house on St. Thomas, part of the United States Virgin Islands, and hunkered down, listening to the howling and thumping outside. Based on the water we took in, we think there is significant damage to the roof but don't think it blew off yet, she said. We've all been in hurricanes before. There are 5 of us here, but have never felt anything like this before," she added. "It feels seismic, it feels catastrophic." Alex Wolfall, a British public relations consultant who was staying at the Westin Resort on the Dutch side of St. Martin, posted a stream of alarming updates on Twitter while taking shelter with other guests in the hotel's reinforced stairwell. He described thunderous sonic boom noises and the scream of things being hurled against the building. "This is like a movie I never want to see," he wrote. Throughout the region, communication was spotty at best. Calls to people, businesses and government agencies, even the British Virgin Islands Department of Disaster Management, rang without being answered, or did not ring at all. "Stuff is flying around outside, and the visibility is down to about 20 to 30 feet, and we haven't hit the peak yet," Jerry Yonno, executive editor of the Virgin Islands Daily News, said in the early afternoon. 2 hours later, calls to the newspaper could not get through. A JetBlue flight from San Juan to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, was canceled only after the passengers, many of them trying to get back to their homes in Florida, had checked out of hotels and gone to the airport. The 97 passengers were taken instead to the Clemente Coliseum, along with hundreds of others seeking shelter. "Tempers got a little heated. I had to control the situation," said Carmen Yulín Cruz, the mayor of San Juan. "That's like a spark in a gasoline tank. 500 people in one place. If one of them gets out of whack, it could have a ripple effect." She said the city was ready for whatever may come, having stockpiled fuel, ice and medication. The mayor said she, her family and their dogs would stay at the stadium, too. "If they get wet, I get wet," she said. Irma hit just days after Hurricane Harvey caused record flooding in Texas. With 2 other storms now reaching hurricane status, Jose, trailing behind Irma, and Katia, in the Gulf of Mexico, meteorologists noted the unusual occurrence of 3 hurricanes forming at once in the Atlantic basin. Hurricane Irma's maximum sustained winds of 185 meters (ph) have been matched by only 3 other Atlantic storms. The last, Hurricane Wilma, was in 2005. By Wednesday afternoon, Irma had kept that wind speed for over 24 hours, the longest period ever recorded. The storm first made landfall on Barbuda about 2 a.m., then ripped across several more islands without losing intensity, traveling west-northwest. Puerto Rico was spared the worst of the storm's wrath as it churned past in the evening. The center of the storm stayed about 50 miles north of the island. Monroe County, which includes the Florida Keys, issued a mandatory evacuation order on Wednesday. Broward County, which includes Fort Lauderdale, advised people to evacuate some areas. In South Florida, which has millions of people and only 2 major highways, Interstates 95 and 75, to take people farther north, traffic and fuel shortages were already becoming problems as people tried to get out of the storm's path. Even so, more evacuation orders and advisories are expected in other parts of the region, and officials urged people to follow them, assuring the public that plenty of shelter space will be available. "I cannot stress this enough," Governor Rick Scott said. "Do not ignore evacuation orders. We can rebuild your home, but we cannot rebuild your life." Source News, New York Times. If you like video, please subscribe to my channel. Here is the latest predicted path for Hurricane Irma, hurtles toward Florida. Hurricane Irma, the most powerful Atlantic storm on record, is likely to cause massive destruction wherever it makes landfall. But predicting exactly where it will come ashore is a difficult task. The National Hurricane Center issues forecasts every 3 hours, and this map will update automatically. The line shows the most likely predicted path, with a cone reflecting the uncertainty around that. All times are U.S. Eastern. Hurricane force winds are 74 miles per hour and above, but Irma's strongest winds have been much more powerful. The storm has already delivered winds of 85 miles per hour and threatens storm surges of 10 to 20 feet. See here for the latest watches and warnings about the storm, and here for other information from the National Hurricane Center. Source News, BuzzFeed.com. If you like video, please subscribe to my channel. Miami, this could be the big one, again, and everyone knows it, and if people here are getting a bit frantic, that might not be an irrational response. Hurricane Irma is about as big as a tropical cyclone can possibly get, and the latest computer models show it aimed at South Florida as if following directions by GPS. There are more than 6 million people in Dade, Broward and Palm Beach counties, all concentrated between the beach and the swamps. Many have been streaming north on Interstate 95 or Florida's Turnpike, and gas stations have plastic bags on the pumps. The region's airports were slammed, and it had become difficult to score a seat on any airplane, going anywhere. "I'm nervous, and I never get nervous in storms," said Jane Llewellyn, a rental car sales agent at the Fort Lauderdale-Hollywood International Airport and a resident of Miami Beach. She said Irma seemed more aggressive than Andrew in 1992. "It's just so massive and it's just so fast, and it's just so hot here. It's going to get worse." Irma is an extremely dangerous Category 5 hurricane that had sustained winds of 185 miles per hour as it ripped through the Caribbean on Wednesday, battering the northern Lesser Antilles and Virgin Islands, in some cases leaving behind massive destruction, such as on the small island of Barbuda. The storm next headed toward Puerto Rico, where some residents are preparing to be without electricity for as long as 6 months. Although the storm center passed north of Puerto Rico itself, the hurricane still delivered lashing rain bands, damaging winds and warnings of flash flooding. On Wednesday, Irma hit Barbuda and the Leeward Islands, territories and Commonwealth stretching southeast from Puerto Rico. A weather station recorded sustained winds of 118 miles per hour and a wind gust to 155 miles per hour before the instrument failed, according to the National Hurricane Center, which called the storm's conditions life-threatening. This hurricane's 185-mile-per-hour maximum sustained winds are the strongest recorded for a landfalling hurricane in the Atlantic Ocean, tied with the 1935 Florida Keys hurricane. The National Hurricane Center said on Wednesday evening that Irma remains powerful and that Puerto Rico should expect hurricane conditions through Wednesday night and could see as much as 20 inches of rain in some places. The storm is projected to pass by the Dominican Republic, Haiti and Cuba in the next 2 days before it could make landfall somewhere in South Florida on Sunday, though intense winds could begin long before that. In San Juan, Puerto Rico, people in the Monterey neighborhood prepared for the storm under unusually calm, cool weather Wednesday that gave way to a light drizzle. People expect to lose power, which is nothing unusual for the neighborhood, where power often goes out for a few hours after a heavy rainstorm. The power went out at about 10:15 a.m. on Wednesday. Even though her house was boarded up, Rita Hernandez could hear the sing-song calls of yucca platinos from a pregonero, a roaming fruit and vegetable vendor, making what was likely his last run before the storm truly arrived. With the storm still days away, it was relatively unusual for the people of South Florida to go into full-on storm preparation mode. But this is a scary hurricane at a moment when anyone paying attention to the news understands what a big storm can do. On Virginia Key, at the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science, Professor David Nolan was putting heavy plastic over computer terminals, in case the roof leaks during the storm. He said his family plans to drive to Atlanta, while he'll ride it out behind storm shutters at his home in Coral Gables. But that plan could change, he said. Lots of people are still thinking this through. The mood in South Florida, he said, is frantic. Anxious, frantic, chimed in his colleague, Senior Research Associate Brian Gnaldi. "I saw a gas station-induced car accident happen right in front of me yesterday," Nolan said. Gnaldi, who contributes to the Washington Post's Capital Weather Gang, called up the model forecasts and showed how Irma is expected to move in more or less a straight line toward Florida, west by northwest, but then hang a sharp right to the north. That track could send it right to Gnaldi's cubicle and on up the Gold Coast, as if the storm were trying to grind away a century of urbanization. "That's extremely bad," he said. "That's basically every East Coast Florida city. This could easily be the most expensive U.S. storm if this happens." He hastened to add, as all forecasters do, that a forecast 4 or 5 days in advance is typically off by something like 185 miles, and Irma could still veer west toward the Gulf or stay east and never make landfall. But it could also go right up the center of the peninsula. "We're surrounded by hot water," Gnaldi said. "The state itself is not good at doing damage to hurricanes. It's flat. It's pretty wet, So you're not going to drag in dry air. They don't weaken much. The Florida Keys are particularly vulnerable. Monroe County, home to the Keys, began mandatory evacuations of tourists and visitors Wednesday morning. The county's 80,000 residents were ordered to evacuate beginning Wednesday evening. The main drag in Key West, Duval Street, was largely empty Wednesday. Many storefronts already had been sandbagged and boarded up. But some people will ride out the storm, as Floridians often do even when told they're supposed to leave. At the Ernest Hemingway Home and Museum, General Manager Jackie Sands said she's not going anywhere. She is charged with securing the legendary author's 19th-century estate as well as ensuring the safety of the 55 cats that roam the lush grounds here, many of them with 6 and 7 toes on each paw. "If I didn't have to, I wouldn't stay," Sands said. "My kids told me to get the hell out. But I have an obligation to take care of the building and the cats." The petite 72-year-old will be joined by 9 employees, 4 of whom she has sent off to retrieve storm shutters and plywood from a nearby storage facility to board up windows and doors. "They couldn't leave because either they don't have a car or couldn't find a flight out of here," she said. "I think we are going to be fine." At the Key West port, the cruise ships had long departed for safer docks, and the inlet was devoid of pleasure craft. Only 4 small vessels remained in the marina, including a 50-foot boat that ferries residents and hotel guests to and from Sunset Key, a private, 27-acre resort located in waters nearby. The ship's captain, William Harry Privet, 80, said he's never been caught in a hurricane. "Every time, it either veered off or never arrived," he said. He hopes to keep his track record intact. "I know what happens when they show up. I don't want to be here when this one does. It's nasty." Late Tuesday evening, some mainstays, including Sloppy Joe's, kept the doors open for dozens of straggling tourists. "It's the end of the world as we know it," blared through the speaker system. Broward County Mayor Barbara Sheriff said mandatory evacuations will begin Thursday at noon for people in the eastern portion of the county that runs alongside the Atlantic Ocean. "This storm is bigger, faster and stronger than Hurricane Andrew," Florida Gov. Rick Scott, R., said Wednesday, emphasizing that even with Irma's uncertain trajectory, officials were preparing for a direct impact. "Do not sit and wait for the storm to come. It is extremely dangerous and deadly and will cause devastation. Get prepared right now." Scott, who earlier this week declared a statewide emergency, has warned that Irma could require large-scale evacuations and severely impact areas battered last year by Hurricane Matthew, which sent punishing flooding into parts of the state. Officials across Florida responded to the dire forecasts by slowly shutting down the contours of daily life. Schools closed. The NFL postponed the Miami Dolphins season opener scheduled for Sunday. The University of Central Florida in Orlando, which could face punishing weather if Irma crawls up the coastline, moved a football game to Friday night, and the University of Miami, the Hurricanes, announced the cancellations of its football game set for this Saturday in Arkansas so the team doesn't have to travel. Storm preparations also were underway at 2 nuclear sites in Florida, 45-year-old Turkey Point 25 miles south of Miami and 41-year-old Street, Lucy further north along the coast. They belong to NextEra, a utility with about 5 million electricity customers in Florida. NextEra said that it will shut down its 4 nuclear reactors before Irma makes landfall. That will reduce the heat in the reactors and the need for electricity. NextEra also said that its reactors could weather a loss of electricity of the sort that caused a meltdown at Japan's Fukushima Daiichi reactors after the tsunami there in 2011. NextEra spokesman Peter Robbins said that the nuclear plants have diesel generators located 20 feet above sea level inside reinforced concrete structures. People across Florida who planned to ride out the storm were clearing store shelves of water, food and supplies, and people trying to drive north had to search for gas and hotel rooms. Many streamed to South Florida's airports. At the Fort Lauderdale Airport, Sandy Lou Kaswich of Deerfield Beach, Florida, showed the text she'd sent Tuesday morning to her brother-in-law in Indiana. "I'm scared but I don't want Boog to know it. She's gonna witness Mother Nature's most powerful ocean churn." Boog is her sister Karen Romansky, who had been visiting. They saw Hurricane Irma reach Category 5 intensity and early Tuesday decided to evacuate, going online to nab 4 tickets to Chicago on Southwest Airlines. They were evacuating their mother, Virginia Gay, 87, and her friend Thelma Leonard, 91, who sat patiently in wheelchairs Wednesday near the Southwest ticket counter. "I've been through Wilma. I've been through Andrew. I saw what's coming," said Lucaswich, 56. She said she noticed the storm forming off the coast of Africa a week or so ago and thought to herself, "That looks like Andrew." "I wish I could stay home," said Gay, her mother. But her daughters had been emphatic, telling her, according to Lucaswich, "You have no choice. We made a family decision. We are going." The airport had been jammed since before dawn with people trying to get out of the state. Florida's peninsular geography makes flight the best way to flee an oncoming hurricane, but there are only so many planes to catch. By early Wednesday morning, it was hard to get a seat on a plane going anywhere. Seats that were available still for purchase at Florida airports were often exorbitantly expensive, in the range of $2,000. Some of those who were leaving said modern technology, and modern communications, helped inform their decisions, and made them easier. "Back in the 1800s, people wouldn't have had a warning," said Renee Gray, flying with her husband Mitch to their home in Nashville after evacuating from Islamorada, in the Florida Keys, at 4 a.m. "Today we've got warnings, and we have to take advantage of that." Source News, Washington Post. If you like video, please subscribe to my channel. Nearly 900,000 without power after Hurricane Irma lashes Puerto Rico. Nearly 900,000 are without power after Hurricane Irma began battering Puerto Rico Wednesday after slamming the islands of Barbuda and Antigua and leaving at least 3 dead. The storm also left almost 50,000 without water, Puerto Rico's emergency management agency told the Associated Press. Overnight, the powerful Category 5 hurricane made a direct hit on the island of Barbuda, home to some 2,000 residents. French Overseas Minister Annie Girardin said that there have been 2 deaths on the islands of St. Bartholomew and St. Martin, local source BFM-TV reports. She added that 2 others were seriously injured. Barbuda and Antigua's Prime Minister Gaston Browne confirmed that a 2-year-old child died while its family was trying to escape a damaged home during the storm, reports AP. Barbuda. The eye of Hurricane Irma passed over Barbuda around 2 a.m., knocking out the island's communication systems. The roof of the island's police station was ripped off, forcing officers to seek shelter in the fire station. Up to 90% of Barbuda's structures sustained damage, MENC 5. Reports. "Me and my family of 7, including an infant, had to shelter in a closet before the hurricane force winds began," a woman who survived the storm in Barbuda told Antigua's ABS-TV radio. "The roof had already been ripped off and we had to look for shelter. My main concern now is how we're going to survive after this." Browne says roads and telecommunications systems were destroyed and it will take months, if not years, to recover. Antigua. Barbuda's sister island was sideswiped by the hurricane but received minimal structural damage. According to the Antigua Met Service, 3 injuries have been reported. "We in Antigua have weathered the most powerful hurricane ever to storm its way through the Caribbean. The forecast was that Antigua would be devastated, our infrastructure demolished, people killed and our economy destroyed," Prime Minister Gaston Browne said in a Facebook post. "In the light of day, the picture is very different. In Antigua, no life has been lost. All the people survived. The guests in our hotels are all well. Even our animals were protected from this massive storm." The V.C. Byrd International Airport was reopened Wednesday afternoon, St. Lucia News Online. Reports. St. Martin and St. Bart's roofs were ripped off and power was knocked out on both St. Martin and St. Barthélemy, known as St. Bart's. The fire station in St. Bart's was flooded with more than 3 feet of water, making it impossible for rescue vehicles to leave the station, and government headquarters on St. Martin was partially destroyed, the AP reports. St. Martin is home to 75,000 residents and St. Bart's, 9,200. Images posted on social media showed widespread flooding and destroyed homes. The island's Princess Juliana International Airport appears to have suffered major damages, according to images posted by the French weather observatory Chronos. French Interior Minister Gérard Collomb said St. Martin's 4 most solid buildings have been destroyed, according to nationnews.com. The European weather site Meteor Express posted a video Wednesday morning that showed wrecked boats and flooding in Philipsburg, the capital of the Dutch side of St. Martin, known as St. Martin. Dutch Interior Minister Ronald Plasterk said Wednesday the damage wreaked on St. Martin is enormous, noting that the damage inflicted after the storm made a direct hit on the island is so major that we don't yet have a full picture, also because contact is difficult at the moment. British Virgin Islands. The storm descended on the British Virgin Islands Wednesday afternoon, with wind gusts measuring 110 miles per hour. The AP reports. The islands are home to more than 20,000 residents. Richard Branson, the head of the Virgin Group, is riding out the storm on Necker Island and says he and friends have experienced a night of howling wind and rain as Hurricane Irma edges ever closer. The atmosphere is eerie but beautiful, he said. Anguilla. The tourist board told the Associated Press that the major resorts survived, but many private homes were damaged. The airport did not sustain any major damage, but it remains closed along with 2 ports. This is an ongoing report as the hurricane continues on its destructive trajectory, so check back frequently for more information. Source News, Weather.com. If you like video, please subscribe to my channel. Floridians hit the highways, scrambled for scarce supplies and hammered plywood over windows as a monster hurricane made landfall in the Caribbean, where it was blamed for at least 4 deaths. Hurricane Irma, one of the most powerful Atlantic hurricanes, set a wild, wind-churned course toward Puerto Rico, with the U.S. mainland in its sights, likely over the weekend. Amid an overnight assault of battering waves and 185-mile-per-hour winds, 2 deaths were reported in French island territories, a third in Anguilla, a British territory, and a 4th in Barbuda, part of a tiny independent nation. In Florida, Governor Scott implored constituents to obey calls to flee the storm's path when the time came. "I cannot stress this enough. Do not ignore evacuation orders," Scott said at a news briefing as the storm began lashing Puerto Rico with rain, still on track for the U.S. mainland. "If you're told to evacuate, don't wait, get out quickly." In warning of the dangers, the governor invoked Hurricane Andrew, which devastated Florida a quarter of a century ago, causing massive destruction and killing nearly 50 people in the state. "I want everybody to understand the importance of this. This is bigger than Andrew," Scott told ABC News. President Trump declared states of emergency in Florida, Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Florida began activating its National Guard, with 7,000 members told to report for duty Friday. In Fort Myers, in coastal southwestern Florida, Stephanie Madison waited in line at a gas station, where she said she had been for 25 minutes. "I swear, it's like everyone is in a hurry to get this thing over with, like, just come on, Irma, and then leave us alone," said Madison, 47. She experienced Hurricane Wilma in 2005, but Irma's got more punch, from what they're saying. There was a run on supplies, including bananas and batteries. Anthony Bonor, a bread company distributor, predicted that the 28 tracks of bread he was delivering to a picked-over Walmart in Coral Cove, outside Fort Myers, would go fast. "It's kind of like I'm the candy man wherever I show up," he said. "Bread and water are always the first to go. Stand here for 15 minutes, all of this will be gone." A state of emergency was declared earlier for all 67 Florida counties. On Wednesday, South Carolina followed suit, with Gov. Henry McMaster urging the public to not leave storm preparations to the last moment. As he did while Hurricane Harvey pounded Texas late last month, Trump unleashed tweets about the storm's strength. "Hurricane looks like the largest ever recorded in the Atlantic," he wrote Wednesday morning on Twitter. The president also said his team was ready in Florida, adding, "No rest for the weary." Later, heading into a meeting with congressional leaders, he described the storm as something that could be not good, "Believe me, not good." The National Hurricane Center said the storm was one of the 5 most powerful Atlantic hurricanes in the last 80 years and the strongest Atlantic storm on record outside the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea. Satellite imagery of the enormous storm inspired fear and awe. The Hurricane Center in Miami described a vast swirling mass, with hurricane force winds extending 50 miles from the storm center. The hurricane's force was such that it was detected by earthquake measuring equipment on islands it passed, said Stephen Hicks, a seismologist at Britain's University of Southampton. Before dawn Wednesday, the tiny Caribbean nation of Antigua and Barbuda was pummeled by wind and rain as the Category 5 storm passed almost directly above the islands, tearing off roofs, uprooting trees and triggering floods. Many people sought safety in government shelters as the winds turned storm-borne debris into missiles. At first, Prime Minister Gaston Browne tweeted thanks that his nation had been spared the worst. But then came grim word of almost all houses on Barbuda destroyed, and a death. Irma also roared through the French island territories of St. Martin and St. Barthélemy, battering them with wind and water that smashed buildings and toppled trees. It was there that 2 deaths were reported by the French Overseas Territories Minister, Annie Girardin. She also said 2 people were seriously injured. Dutch authorities were keeping an anxious eye on St. Martin, Netherlands territory that shares an island with St. Martin, after the storm disrupted communications and caused heavy damage. In the early afternoon, the eye passed over the British Virgin Islands with winds gusting at 110 miles per hour, the National Hurricane Center reported. Celebrity tycoon Richard Branson, founder of the Virgin Group, owns a small private island in the chain, and blogged beforehand that he and a group of friends would be seeking shelter in a concrete wine cellar. 6 southern islands and the Bahamas were under evacuation orders, Prime Minister Hubert Minnis said, with people being flown to the capital, Nassau. In Puerto Rico, lashed by the storm's leading edge, people hunkered down as the hurricane menaced the U.S. territory, with the height of winds and rain expected later Wednesday. Gov. Ricardo Roslo said the storm's danger was like nothing we've ever seen. As the hurricane closed in, the world's second-largest radio telescope, at Puerto Rico's Arecibo Observatory, suspended operations, its operators announced on Twitter. With Puerto Rico's infrastructure already tottering, islanders were bracing for a loss of power that could last for weeks or even months. In the low-lying Florida Keys, where many people are accustomed to riding out hurricanes, mandatory evacuation orders were in effect for visitors and were extended to residents for later Wednesday. A complicated undertaking that was to include airlifting hospital patients. Tourist idols came to an abrupt halt as hotels shut down and the Key West airport was stopping operations Wednesday, later pushed back to Thursday so more flights could depart. Residents, with a few more hours grace to get out, boarded up homes and businesses, and secured their boats. There's only one highway to the mainland, U.S., Route 1. And it was choked with traffic. Gasoline became harder to find. The governor said that by Wednesday afternoon, about 25,000 people had fled the Florida Keys. Martin Centerfit, the top disaster management specialist for Monroe County, which encompasses the Keys, said that unlike in previous hurricanes, authorities weren't encountering many recalcitrant holdouts against evacuating. I think the general consensus across the state is that this is a big event, he said. With the storm bearing down, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission said it was getting ready to shut down 2 Florida nuclear plants that could be in the hurricane's path, the Turkey Point plant south of Miami, and the St. Lucie plant on the state's east coast. In Miami-Dade County, authorities urged people to stock up on enough food and water to last 3 days, and encouraged people in low-lying areas to leave voluntarily. Schools were closed. Storm monitors reached back nearly a century to provide comparisons, with the Weather Service likening Irma's destructive power to that of Hurricane San Felipe, which killed nearly 3,000 people in Puerto Rico, Florida and the island of Guadeloupe in 1928. Source News, Latums.com. If you like video, please subscribe to my channel. Hurricane Irma, 90% of Barbuda buildings reportedly destroyed. Barbuda's Prime Minister says 90% of buildings and vehicles in the Caribbean nation have been destroyed by Hurricane Irma. 4 people have reportedly been killed by Irma, one of the most powerful Atlantic storms in a century, which has howled past Puerto Rico after thrashing several smaller Caribbean islands with roof-ripping winds, drenching rains and pounding surf on a collision course with Florida. Fatalities were reported on 4 different islands, with weather forecasters describing Irma as a potentially catastrophic Category 5 storm, the highest U.S. classification for hurricanes. The dual-island nation of Antigua and Barbuda was especially hard hit. The northernmost island, Barbuda, home to roughly 1,700 people, was totally demolished, with 90% of all dwellings there leveled, Prime Minister Gaston Browne said, according to island television broadcasts. A second storm-related fatality, that of a surfer, was reported on Barbados, and the French government said at least 2 people were killed in Caribbean island territories of Saint Martin and Saint Barthélemy. Twitter user Alex Wolfall said from Saint Martin the building he was in was shaking as the hurricane passed over in the early hours of the morning. "My God, this noise. It's like standing behind a jet engine. Constant booms and bangs. At least concrete stairwell not moving," he tweeted shortly after posting that the power had gone out. Irma, with top sustained winds of 300 km per hour, was on track to reach Florida on Saturday or Sunday, becoming the second major hurricane to hit the U.S. mainland in as many weeks. While Irma's intensity could fluctuate, and its precise course remains uncertain, the storm is expected to remain at least a Category 4 before arriving in Florida. 2 other hurricanes formed on Wednesday. Katia, in the Gulf of Mexico, posed no threat to the United States, according to U.S. forecasters. But Hurricane Jose, in the open Atlantic, about 1,610 kilometers east of the Caribbean's Lesser Antilles Islands, could also eventually threaten the U.S. mainland. The flurry of severe storm activity comes after Hurricane Harvey claimed about 60 lives and caused property damage estimated as high as $230 billion after pummeling the Gulf coasts of Texas and Louisiana with torrential rains and severe flooding. Florida emergency management officials began evacuations days in advance of Irma's arrival, ordering all tourists to leave the Florida Keys, a resort archipelago off the state's southern tip, starting Wednesday morning. Evacuation of residents from the Keys was beginning on Wednesday evening. Irma's eye just north of Puerto Rico. In Cuba, just 145 kilometers south of the Keys, authorities posted a hurricane alert for the island's central and eastern regions. The eye of Irma was passing just north of Puerto Rico late on Wednesday, buffeting the U.S. island territory's capital, San Juan, with heavy downpours and strong winds. Earlier in the day it passed over the northernmost Virgin Islands after crossing the half-French, half-Dutch island of Saint Martin, the U.S. National Hurricane Center said. On its current path, the core of Irma, which the Miami-based center said marked the strongest hurricane ever recorded in the Atlantic Ocean and one of the 5 most forceful storms to hit the Atlantic basin in 82 years, was expected to scrape the northern coast of the Dominican Republic on Thursday. It was on a track that would put it near the Turks and Caicos and southeastern Bahamas by Thursday evening. U.S. President Donald Trump said he and aides were monitoring Irma's progress. "But it looks like it could be something that will be not good. Believe me, not good," he told reporters at the White House. Mr. Trump, whose waterfront Mar-a-Lago estate in Palm Beach, Florida, could take a direct hit from the storm, has already approved emergency declarations for Florida, Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, mobilizing federal disaster relief efforts. Florida Governor Rick Scott said Irma could be more devastating than Hurricane Andrew, a Category 5 storm that struck the state in 1992 and still ranks as one of the costliest ever in the United States. Residents of low-lying areas in densely populated Miami-Dade County were urged to move to higher ground. "We can expect additional evacuations as this storm continues to come near our state," Mr. Scott told a news conference in the Keys. He said 7,000 National Guard troops would report for duty on Friday, ahead of the storm's expected arrival. In South Carolina, Governor Henry McMaster also declared a state of emergency and urged residents to prepare for Irma's potential landfall there. Source News, ABC Net. Oh, if you like video, please subscribe to my channel. New evacuation orders as Irma feared to strike Florida on Sunday. Florida is bracing as Hurricane Irma, the strongest Atlantic hurricane ever recorded, is feared to hit Florida on Sunday. The hurricane remains a dangerous and life-threatening Category 5 storm, Florida Gov. Rick Scott warned Wednesday night at a briefing. Forecast models have put the storm on a track to hit Florida over the weekend, but meteorologists have warned its path could change. Scott said Florida is at least 48 hours away from feeling the effects of this massive system. The Florida Keys, he said, could feel the effects of the storm Friday night and early Saturday. Irma continues to pack 185-mile-per-hour winds and is located about 50 miles north of San Juan, Puerto Rico, the National Hurricane Center said in a 8 p.m. ET advisory. It was heading west-northwest at 16 miles per hour. Irma is much worse and more devastating on its current path than Hurricane Andrew, a Category 5 storm which hit the state in 1992, he said. The governor also addressed evacuation orders, saying, "If you are told to evacuate, get out quickly." 25,000 people have been evacuated from the Florida Keys, he said. Officials in the Florida Keys have geared up to get tourists and residents out of Irma's potential path, with mandatory evacuations going into effect Wednesday morning. A mandatory evacuation was in effect Wednesday in Monroe County for all visitors to the Florida Keys. A mandatory evacuation for residents began at 7 p.m. Wednesday. "Do not focus on the exact path of this storm," Scott said at an earlier Wednesday briefing. "A storm of this size could have effects statewide and everyone must be prepared." Broward County Mayor Barbara Sheriff said Wednesday that mandatory evacuations have been issued starting at noon Thursday for all residents east of U.S. Route 1, known as Federal Highway, including all barrier islands. Sheriff said 14 emergency shelters will open Thursday at noon, which are a refuge of last resort. The county does have pet-friendly shelters, with a full list available on the county's website. Further south, Miami-Dade Mayor Carlos Jimenez said about 2,200 special needs residents have been evacuated, and the evacuations will continue until they're complete. Mandatory evacuation orders have been issued for the entirety of Zone A, along with Zone B barrier islands. In Miami-Dade County, WSVN reported Wednesday night. A Navy spokesman told Fox News 5,000 non-essential personnel and family members based at Naval Air Station Key West are evacuating, adding that 50 to 60 mission-essential personnel will stay to continue essential functions. All Florida Navy installations are working through checklists to prepare their installations for the storm, Bill Doherty said. In addition to the evacuation, Navy officials told Fox News warships meant for Hurricane Harvey relief are now being staged to deal with Irma. The amphibious assault ship USS Kearsarge, smaller USS Oak Hill will remain off the coast of Florida to be ready to support any work related to Irma relief instead of heading to Texas as previously scheduled. Additional warships have left port in Florida to evade the storm, according to officials. Elsewhere in South Florida, Miami-Dade officials have said that residents should indeed be getting ready, with some schools being canceled for the rest of the week, WSVN reported. "This is a powerful storm which poses a serious threat," Miami-Dade County Mayor Carlos Jimenez said. Area residents have filled stores to stock up on supplies, with some locations reporting shortages of water. Nicole Cherry, who is shopping at a Publix in Miami Shores, told WSVN she tried and failed to find water as she prepares for the approaching storm. "They say that they can't give me any pack," Cherry said. "They say that the truck is on the way, but they don't have no time frame." The National Weather Service director said Wednesday his staff is very worried about the impact of winds and surge on the Keys as Irma approaches. Director Louis Uxlini says all the hazards will be dangerous with Irma. That means the storm surge, high winds and heavy rain, and that very strong winds can do a lot of damage in an urban environment like South Florida. The key for Florida and the U.S. East Coast is when and where Irma makes a right turn and heads north. He says where that happens depends on a low-pressure system over the Great Lakes region. To figure all this out, the Weather Service is using its newest satellite and launching 49 new balloons to gather information for computer models. The Department of Homeland Security stated in a news release that Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as well as Customs and Border Protection, will not conduct non-criminal immigration enforcement operations in the affected area, but will be working with local and state authorities to conduct search and rescue, air traffic deflection and public safety missions. Irma's unknown track has officials north of Florida getting ready for the worst. Gov. Roy Cooper, of North Carolina, declared a state of emergency early Wednesday evening, effective 8 a.m. Thursday morning. South Carolina Gov. Henry McMaster also declared a state of emergency Wednesday, since Irma's path could take the powerful storm through the state. The declaration allows state officials to set up an operations center at the Emergency Management Division headquarters in West Columbia. Source News, Fox News.com. If you like video, please subscribe to my channel.